So, good evening. Happy Halloween, everybody. We're going to talk about ghost stories and all things paranormal and World War II and mysterious tales and all that kind of jazz. Anything to brighten up what is depressing news worldwide. I'm in France. We've been on lockdown for 2 or 3 days, and Britain just happened. So let's just banish some of those blues and talk about some ghost stories. So a couple of amazing guests for you tonight. My old friend Neil R Storey, who I've known for 25 years or something. Neil is a local history, paranormal, World War One, World War Two, social history, crime, ripperologist, you name it. Neil's written about it. More books than Barbara Cartland. That's the name that came into my head there. And a different subject. So good evening, Neil. Are you good? Are you well?
Hello, Paul. Good to see you, and a happy Halloween to you and all the viewers and listeners.
And my second guest, Penny Griffiths Morgan, who runs a very successful Haunted Histories podcast and is a historian, paranormal expert, was supposed to be on a ghost hunt or something tonight, and it got cancelled. So you're with me instead. So there we are. So we're going to talk about some ghostly things and what have you. And I just want to sort of start by saying that a disclaimer, I suppose, in no way, if we're talking about ghosts and what have you, are we kind of belittling deaths on battlefield and tragic events. We're not, the cemeteries in Normandy are amazing places to visit. And if we happen to tell a couple of ghost stories, we're not treading on anybody's memory. It's just there are these things. There are stories there. I've met veterans who have things they can't explain. Our guests will have things they can't explain. And we're just going to talk about it because we're a group of friends, basically. So that's it. That's my little disclaimer. So basically, who wants to start with a spooky story? Who wants to start with something odd they want to start with? Neil?
I think it's normally ladies first, and please, ladies first, to tell a story.
Okay, so Penny
what
goes
I would
first
like
with
to
something.
do is just to add to what you're saying about respecting the fallen and our battlefields and cemeteries, where we all pay our respects, and we've done so much research over those places over so many, many years. But years ago, we also knew a lot of the veterans. We knew them from in the 1980s, 1990s in particular, and we were young guys getting interested in history. And when you got to know the veterans, a lot of them, because they had come through when they were on their own, or just small groups of them, they were a lot of them quite spiritual guys, because they said, there must have been something to look after me, a guiding spirit. There was a belief in fate, I think, or we'll come on to that a little bit more. But I think it's certainly, it shouldn't be seen as disrespectful. There's a huge long history of ghosts and the paranormal associated with military history, and I'll come on to that a little bit later. But I think, we should be remembering the men and women of both wars and all conflicts when we consider the paranormal, ghost stories, legends, and a little bit of folklore.
I want to
excellent words. And it's just I think when we're talking about people who survived horrific events like First World War, Second World War, they want to put that survival to something, or someone else's loss. They put an explanation to it, and some people would put that into faith or spirituality, and some would put it into something else. So it's just, anyway, that's we're going to just talk about actual ghost stories now. So as Neil's going to hand over, Penny, tell us, let's get the ball rolling with a spooky story.
Okay, well, I do actually want to echo what Neil said, and as a paranormal investigator, one of the things that a lot of us in my community believe in is respecting the spirits, is not being antagonistic, is not being, especially when you are, as you say, on a battlefield. There would have been a lot of fear, there would have been a lot of pain, there would have been a lot of people never got to say goodbye to their family. So one of my, if I'm on an investigation and I hear someone being with the spirits, I will pull them to one side and read them the riot act. So any stories that I'm going to tell of personal experiences, they are done with the utmost respect. And my theory is, when a spirit, especially one that died in horrific circumstances, like in a battle or whatever, when they are trying to contact you, I actually think they've got to want to speak to you. If you think of them as being a sentient being, they want to speak to you. They want to tell you what happened to them. They want to give you a message a lot of the time. So that is something to I think, to keep in mind from as a paranormal, well, I'm a paranormal historian, I guess is my term. But one of the first stories I'm going to tell now, it's not the one that anyone who's reading Twitter that I told Alina and Alex when I did History Hack that actually made Alina speechless. This, I'm going to tell that one in a bit. But the first one I'm going to tell you, I was doing some investigating for my second book, A Haunted Experiment, at RAF Tippenham in Norfolk, which was home of the 445th bomber group, the one that actually Jimmy Stewart, the American actor, flew for, the beautiful Liberator aeroplane, of which I hasten to add there are none flying in the UK, none at all at the moment. And there's lots of gadgets and stuff that paranormal investigators use. None of these have been proven unequivocally to communicate with spirits, but sometimes you get hits on them, which is very, very hard to explain. So this evening, weather was pretty much like it is outside at the moment, blowing a bit of a hoolie, raining, not particularly pleasant, very cold as well. And my husband and I were walking on the runways, which is one of the only original World War II bits left at RAF Tippenham. And we're using a device called a spirit box. Now, a spirit box is also sometimes called a broken radio. It's a one-way radio that basically the spirits are meant to be able to manipulate the white noise to communicate with you. Some people don't like them, some people do. I take everything with a pinch of salt if something comes up, but I don't try and shoehorn it into it. Okay, so I'm writing down what's coming through the spirit box, and we keep hearing this American voice coming through, and he keeps saying something along the lines, it sounds like Marley or Morley, and we say, sorry, what was your name? Marley, Morley, that's kind of what it sounded like. And it was like, okay, what else do you want to tell us? And he kept saying the number 11 and then Marley, Morley. We didn't think too much of it because it also sounded like he was trying to say Brimble, but it was the same voice. And this is unusual with one of these devices because to get them, they scan over about 350 sort of things a second. So they're scanning pretty fast to get a multi-syllable with the same voice. It's not normally a radio channel. Anyway, I didn't think anything of it. Wrote it down, nothing else came through, the voice went. It was actually, and this was on the 29th, no, the 30th of November, we did this investigation, and this is the 30th of November 2019. Anyway, so the person keeps saying Marley, Morley, it's the 30th of November 2019, and he keeps saying 11. So I didn't think anything of it. Next day, I'm telling my dad what we'd found because he's the one who'd arranged the investigation for us. And we told him about this and he sort of went a bit pale. Oh, what's the matter? And he went, wait. And he went back and he's got all the mission logs for the 445th. And he came back and on the 29th of November, 1944, 31 aeroplanes left Tippenham to go on a bombing raid. One got shot down, never to return. The pilot's name was Morley. It was in the 11th month and it was his 11th mission. I'll just leave that one there.
Well, that's exactly the kind of thing we wanted to start off with, those things that we can't explain. And yeah, and I should point out as well, thank you for that, by the way, that anyone watching, if you want to call in with your own story, feel free to do so. I'll put the Zoom link in YouTube if anyone wants to join in, or I'll email you or private message me or something. But we're welcome anyone else to join in. In fact, to move on from an Air Force, Army, Air Corps story, well, I'm going to bring in a guest straight away. Sally's been waiting in the waiting room for a second. I'm bringing Sally, who's a RAF veteran and historian, and she's got a story about RAF Digby, which she'll bring in when she comes in a second. So, are you there, Sally? Hello, Sally. Good evening.
Hi, Sally.
Hello, Sally.
Hi.
So, share your story with us, then, please, and thank you for joining in. It's I last saw you on our war films show.
Yes, you did.
Seems like ages ago now. It was only about 2
Appointment
weeks.
in London.
Yeah. So Sally, share us your story.
I've actually I've probably got about 8 here, but 5 of them have happened to me. So I'll just go through. I'll go through the one that kind of like, it didn't freak me out because I think I understood what was happening. but it was when I was based at RAF Wittering. I'd had a hysterectomy when I was 29, and I'd been really ill beforehand because I had something called endometriosis. So I got myself into physically I was really ill, and emotionally I was very drained and tired and just sort of like recuperating. And it was over the summer, and I was in the old wing of the officers' mess at RAF Wittering. And this room I had the sunshine all day, but it was absolutely freezing cold. And every time you walked into the room, there was this overwhelming sense of sadness and just kind of, oh, what's happening, what's going on. It was just so sad in this room. And yeah, I ended up after about 6 weeks asking to move rooms to a different room in the mess because I was struggling to sleep. I was waking up and waking up crying, and I put it all down to the fact that my body was just trying to adjust and everything. And I moved 2 rooms down in the corridor, and suddenly the room was absolutely fine. It was warm. It felt welcoming. I felt happy, and I didn't really push the mess staff about it at all until I was posted, and I handed the keys back, and I said, you know, I changed rooms, and it was all very strange when I was living in that wing. And the lady said, yeah, we had that was where the WAFs used to live during the Second World War, and one of the girls hung herself in her room when her fiance didn't come back from a mission. I'm getting goosebumps pimples now, but that happened to me, and whether it was trying to use me as a conduit to, I don't know, and I tried to sort of like put it behind me and forget about it. And I've had a couple of other things that have happened. From Wittering, I was posted to RAF Waddington, and the building that I worked in was a World War I barrack block. It was called Anson Block, and it's on the base at Waddington. And when the Waddington Air Show was on in the summer, nobody could get on or off camp. So everybody said, oh, we'll stay in the building overnight, etc., etc. And the guys that I worked with were sleeping in the main office, and I kept on the floor in my office. And all night there was this thump, 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 up and down the corridor, and the sound of doors being open and shut. And it wasn't the pipes. First thing you'd think, oh yeah, it's a First World War building, it's going to be the pipes creaking and groaning and all of that kind of stuff. But it wasn't. And one of the corporals that worked for me said, oh, I never ever liked being in this room after 5 o'clock on an evening and having to lock up and do the keys and check that all the rooms are empty, because he said the number of times I've felt like there's been someone right behind me breathing down my neck. And so there was that one, and then very, very last one as well, RAF Digby, quite famous. It's mentioned in, I think, Haunted Airfields of Lincolnshire. I'm a bit obsessed with all the ghost stories surrounding RAF bases. But someone said on Twitter earlier, oh, is it Stumpy? There's quite a famous ghost of an airman on a bike who used to stop people walking around and say, can you show me the way to the control tower, even though the control tower was knocked down after the Second World War. But the thing that I experienced, I had my dog, my 13-year-old dog, who was about 5 or 6 at the time, and one of the downstairs rooms, we were going along the corridor, walking past to go up the stairs, and there was a scratching, like scratching and snuffling from behind the door, and the dog went absolutely bonkers. He was barking, all his hackles went up, and I just thought, oh, someone's left their poor dog in the room, and they've gone out, and the thing needs to go out for the toilet. And I'd gone upstairs, put Charlie into the room, and later on that evening, I said, oh, who's got a dog? And the mess manager said, oh, you're the only person with a dog in the mess at the moment. And I said, well, there was something scratching. And he said, oh, yes, that room. And apparently, it was one of the pilots had gone away on a mission, had left his dog in his room. He'd been killed. Obviously, the dog, but it was almost like an echo of the dog scratching at the door. So yeah, there's quite a few.
There is something in the paranormal. Sorry, I just add some of the
please jump in.
terminology to this. There is something in the paranormal world called stone tape theory, which explains. I don't know if you've heard of that before, Sally. It's something that explains the feeling you got in the room of the woman who you hung herself.
Yeah.
It's a theory that the emotion and what happened can actually almost be absorbed into the material of the room. So if you're a sensitive enough person, you can walk in there. And that's why sometimes you can walk into a room and think, oh, something really bad happened in here, but you don't know what it is. You can just sense that badness.
Yeah.
So those, I love haunted airfield stories, and having experienced haunted airfields, quite a few of them myself on my road trips and things. And ironically, I drove past Wittering this week.
You can actually see it when you go up the A1, so you're coming sort of like from the Stamford way going north, you've got the Harrier on your left hand side, and you can just see the end of the mess, the wing of the mess where it all happened. But it's very, I mean, you've probably been to Colby Grange, and you know all about Colby Grange and the Lancasters, and people being able to hear the sound of all the propellers going, and people playing cricket out on the airfield and things like that. And the Wittering thing was just such it was almost, I don't know whether it felt like someone was trying to pick up on my energy, because I was a bit down at the time, but I just put it down to, being a bit poorly and trying to recover it, etc. But no, I've had something else that's completely unrelated. It's nothing to do with wartime, but Edinburgh Castle. I walked into the Queen's room, and I stepped through the door, and you said that the stone
tape theory.
Stone tape theory.
Yeah.
I felt like somebody pushed me, and I was winded, pushed backwards. I felt sick. I went grey. I was freezing cold, but soaking wet with sweat. I couldn't speak or anything, went outside, and I was shaking. And my husband came out and said, "What on earth happened?" I said, "Something didn't want me in there. It did not like me. It didn't want me in there." And yeah, that's the last time, touch wood, anything's happened to me. My husband thinks I'm crazy. My gran didn't. She was massively into spiritualism, and my mum believes me as well, because she's had a few weird things happen to her. So.
You've inherited it from them.
Something like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you, Sally. That was great. So I'll jump in and say some things, and I'll let Neil talk in a minute as well. But that's exactly what we wanted, just those things that we can't necessarily explain, and just things and stories, and there's no harm discussing them. It's just stuff, isn't it? There's no, don't make any judgments. But yeah, thanks very much, Sally, and you're always welcome to come back whenever you want to. So I'll drop you out, and we'll bring Neil in. He's been sitting here very patiently, and I'll do so mine. So thanks, Sally. That's great. See you again. Bye.
I was interested to hear the comment about the stone tape theory. I remember that film very well. But interestingly, the science of the paranormal can often relate to things that you will see in films. And one of the earliest cases of these imprints, now imprint is interesting, because if something dramatic or happens somewhere, or something that happens regularly, it could be a sound, it could be a murder, it could be a crime, it could just be somebody very ill or very sad in a place, can leave an imprint on a wall. I'm sure we've all of us who love military history have walked into a place, maybe we know its history. It's a castle that's had a violent siege, perhaps a battlefield. If you've walked the Somme, or if you walk through the cemeteries, there are atmospheres. Now, whether that is something deep inside us, where inside we kind of imagine that we should feel this, and we do feel this, or is there a residual energy around there? And certainly I've felt it many times walking those battlefields, and I thought, is it unique to the First or the Second World Wars? And it was intriguing when I walked the field of Flodden, which is up here in Northumberland. That has it's two slopes really that converge over an area that would have been extremely boggy at the time of the battle. And we've maybe seen the Kenneth Branagh, Henry V, and everybody's wielding swords. And you can imagine Flodden being a very similar conflict fought amid this mud. And it has the resonance of hundreds of years later, the Battle of the Somme, fought, and particularly Passchendaele, conflicts in mud, all of that. And I felt that same atmosphere on Flodden Field. Yeah. But when it comes to sort of replays, I think that air bases seem particularly prone to this phenomena. And it's way back in the 1970s. I recall one of the earliest instances. There was a film crew and they were making training films at the Construction Training Centre at Bircham Newton. Now, Bircham Newton's in Norfolk.
I know Bircham Newton, yeah.
You'll know it.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, an active base throughout the Second World War, taken over by construction industry. So they're making films about construction. And one of the guys, he felt a bit of an atmosphere and he thought, what about the squash court? Now, you've got the key to the squash court. Nobody comes and goes unless you've got the key. So they locked in a tape recorder during the night. And you probably heard this story, Penny. Many people have, but for those that haven't,
I had this one on my list, Neil. I've just crossed it out, so I
well,
can't.
no, share some more if you know the people, the names of those who were involved with that at the time. But it was just uncanny that in this room where they locked off with the tape recorder, that the sounds of the active airfield appeared on the tape. Now, I have heard this tape as well. And it doesn't sound like somebody's just whacked on a BBC sound recording of bomber. You can hear them taking off. You can hear some clanking of machinery. You know, a busy airbase sound. And there's nothing like that going on there. It's at night. It's all. And even if it had been recorded during daytime, you haven't got aircraft taken off at Bircham Newton anymore. No. It's really strange. And when they were filming around there, they often felt that somebody was watching them, watching from the gallery above the squash court, and you'd kind of turn around and you could, did you see somebody? Did you imagine somebody? It's intriguing stuff.
Yeah. Wasn't it the squash court that there was a crash? One of the aircraft crashed actually on the site of where the squash court.
Oh, is that right? Oh my word!
That's the story I've been told by a good friend of mine who does. He's making it his mission to log all of the airfields in Norfolk before they get forgotten, and he's going in and investigating a lot, looking at the back histories. Where he sent me a story, and it was the Bircham one, and apparently where the squash courts were was where one of the bombers crash landed, killing the crew. And a friend of his was actually playing squash in the court and heard like a 4-engine bomber noise. They both heard it, ran outside to see what on earth was going on, because there's not really many 4-engine bombers flying in the UK, is there? I mean, you probably, well, you've got the Fortress and the Sally B and the Lank, the BBMF Lank is about it. They heard it, ran outside, nothing there. But they both heard it whilst they were playing squash. So yeah, that it's again, yeah, I think I agree with you there. I think that's a residual energy. And to those listening who don't know what we mean by residual compared to when I said about spirits being sentient beings, they do believe there's two real types of hauntings. There's what we call residual, or the imprint, as Neil was mentioning. And this is one that I always say it's like a video that's on repeat. The event just keeps happening over and over again, but the spirits involved in it aren't feeling the pain or the crash or the murder, or it's almost like it's on a video that's on loop. You can't interact with them, you can't stop it, you can't change what's going to happen. It's like Groundhog Day. But then when you've got the more the interactive spirits, they're the ones that you can ask them questions and you can try and communicate with them. But yes, Bircham is one that a lot of people want to get and investigate that site, because it is meant to be, as you say, very active.
It is. But you know, you can even go back to the 17th century, the English Civil War, 1642, you know, and you get back to, you know, the Battle of Edge Hill. Talking, I mean, there are stories back that far where they were saying that the battle was refought in the sky over the battlefield on the anniversary of the battle.
Yeah.
A year later, and there were people going along there, and they were looking into the sky and recognizing people. And I think that's a very interesting testimony. But it's an idea of, is it a replay? Did it happen? Very strange.
Or is it time isn't linear and it's a bounce back in time that we're seeing something in time and all those wonderful things?
One thing I'm going to add is there was a study, I think it was Pennsylvania, it might have been Virginia, a few years ago. About 1,000, they got 1,000 random people or students or something, and blindfolded, they took them to different locations and said, what do you feel about this location? And it was all array of things. It was supermarket car parks, you know, shopping malls, plain farmers' fields, this, that, and the other. And the one thing that they all uniquely were able to, well, not completely, but overwhelmingly were able to identify with the battlefields. And they did it at night, so there'd be no kind of noise. You'd be able to tell, even with blindfolds on, if you're in a supermarket car park, you better hear cars driving around and trolleys. But this was done at night, and everybody, well, most people identified the battlefields. So something happened there, and that's why I think it was Pennsylvania. It's places like Gettysburg and this from the Revolutionary War and Civil War. Yeah. So I mean, I don't believe in spirits, although I can't say they don't exist because you can't disprove a. So I don't believe, but I can't say they don't exist because you can't prove. Anyway. But I do believe in this idea of things being left. I mean, I went, in France. I live, I can go up staircases in farm buildings that you've seen 400 years of steps being worn into the stone there. So if you can physically wear into stone, why can't people walking up and down that staircase leave an imprint?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I'm okay with that. Definitely that principle. So that's my thing. Who wants to do one next? Another. Also, I do one of mine. I do one of mine.
Yeah.
So I'll do one of mine, and mine are from Normandy, and they all share a theme, and the theme is people appearing who shouldn't really be there to save other people. And the first two I got are from an excellent book that you can't get anymore called Avenging Eagles by Mark Bando, a historian from Detroit, who's very into Chinese year of the rat and things and coincidences of birthday. He's a really kind of spiritual guy. And the two stories, one is there's a guy called Al Hazendal, who was a C Company 506 officer who I used to correspond with. And he and a couple other guys on D-Day are walking down a road, and they come across a lieutenant called Kenneth Beatty from the same company who said, you don't want to go down that road because there's a machine gun down there. And they said, okay, we won't go that way. We'll go that way. He said, yeah, don't go down there. I've just come that way. And they asked him what he was doing. He said, I'm just rolling up my stick, meaning he's collecting his stick of paratroopers who landed over the fields. And Al and his two buddies went on their separate ways and got involved in some stuff. And I'll explain the end of that story in a minute. And the second one is almost similar with a guy who met another officer and similar kind of thing. And in this case, they hugged. They actually hugged and they talked about football for a while on D-Day. And they said, oh, where are you going and what are you doing then? And funny that we're here and this, that, and the other. And they went their separate ways to their separate drop zones. And that guy's name was Ed Frosty Peters. And I knew his son, who's also called Ed Peters. And these are two examples in the 101st Airborne of groups of people encountering officers. Now, the interesting thing is Kenneth Beatty in the first story died in an air crash before the sun came up on D-Day, 10 miles away from where he was sighted speaking to people. And the other guy, Frosty Peters, was seen 5 days after he was known to be killed, walking up and down, warning people. And then someone else came forward at a reunion years and years later and said, yeah, he saved me from going down the lane in Carrington on June the 11th or something. And the three who'd seen Kenneth Beatty, and he died, I've been to the memorial where his aircraft crashed. The three who saw him, they all met up regularly after, and they all absolutely confirmed they definitely met this guy. And yet this guy definitely died in an air crash 10 miles away from where they were supposed to be. So that is just very odd, and I don't know how to explain those. And I find them intriguing, but I like the idea of a spirit, if it is a spirit, actually being someone to assist somebody. Because I grew up, because my mum, I'm going for a tangent, is about 5 miles away from Borley Rectory. So my mum is from, suppose, the most haunted part of Suffolk. For those who are watching in the USA, Borley Rectory is probably on everybody's list of topmost 5
Suffolk Essex sort of borders, isn't it?
Yeah, borders, on the borders, yeah. So and my idea as a kid is that spirits are malevolent and nasty and they're there to scare. That's kind of what I grew up with as a kid. And then coming to Normandy, and I've been here for 20 years now, the idea of spirits actually being there to offer warnings or save people, I think is a much nicer, I don't know if nice is the right word, but a nicer idea. And it's just shifted my balance a little bit about what I kind of think. But that's 2 stories that are both in that book, Avenging Eagles, which is all sorts of stories of murders and it's stuff that he couldn't put in his conventional books. And he usually gives his characters, the people in the book, fake names because of the uncomfortable nature. It's people who, got involved in crimes, this, that, and other. Anyway, that's my first story. It is what it is.
Paul, what I'd like to say with those stories, buddy.
Yeah, please.
It's important that, number one, there's an old saying, you fear the unknown. And I think that's why parents tell ghosty stories, and grandparents and people will tell you a ghost story, it'll make you jump, oh, it's frightening. And that's the oral tradition, often of the fear of the unknown. But rather like we were saying at the very start of our talk about respecting those that were involved in combat, and how you have been in Normandy now, Paul, and those that were involved in combat in foreign fields, right back through history, there is a theme in having fallen comrades helping them. Now, it's unusual to have a name for that fallen comrade. There's a manifestation that you'll see in the Franco-Prussian War, the American Civil War, and even in World War I, where they will speak of somebody known as the Comrade in White. Now, the Comrade in White can be found, and it's beautifully analysed as a story by my friend James Haywood, Myths and Legends of the First World War. And it was a pleasure to work with James on some of those stories as well. But it's his baby, but he looked at the Comrade in White and this idea of a figure that you can be lost in the middle of no man's land, and the figure comes out of nowhere, and you think it's nighttime. He appears to be very white. He looks solid, but his uniform is very, very pale and white. Sometimes he even has a Christ-like glow to him, like a heavenly body figure. We're not going to go quite into the Angel of Mons territory, although there were men who swore they saw the Angels of Mons. They swore that they saw St. George.
The White Cavalry. The White Cavalry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they saw them on all sides. On both sides, I mean, the German forces, the British forces saw them. So the Comrade in White is a known phenomenon, and I'll tell you briefly a story. Rather like this veteran passed away a few years ago, so I'll call him by his first name. His name was Leslie, and he may or may not have told his family this story. He was a lovely, lovely man, and he was in the Royal Engineers. And he was a field company, so they were involved in all sorts of bridges and all sorts. He was not full-time involved in any type of bomb disposal or mine detection. But there were times when they encountered minefields, that's for sure. And they got involved with the clearance at that point. Very early on, after the 6th of June 44, D-Day, he landed on D-Day. He was one of the beach companies, very good. And he was making his way through, and they thought, oh, well, a lot of these minefields, they're a load of rubbish. And his pal Tommy had made a bit of a joke of it, lit a fag and said, we'll be all right, lads. And he took 2 steps into the field and he put his foot on a mine, and up went Tommy. But the strange thing was that for the men that followed after Tommy, after that, they followed Leslie because Tommy was killed straight in front of Les. They followed Leslie and they got through to the other side, and they said, oh, it must have been just the one. But those that came afterwards that actually cleared the field, it was strewn with them, but Leslie found this pathway. Les and his field company, whenever they encountered a minefield, or there would be some Leslie would say, right lads, just hang you on, for he was a Norfolk man.
You're right, boy.
Hang you on, boy. And Leslie was lovely, and he confided in me that the moment that Tommy was gone, Tommy was beside him whenever there were these very, very trying times, and they were great pals. And you know, if they're moving towards a field or a dangerous area, Tommy would say, hang on, hold you hard. He'd hear his voice, and then when they got to the field, either Tommy would be in his ear saying, don't you go that way, go that way, go that way, or Tommy would actually lead them through. And when they got to the other side, when they got safe, Tommy would turn around to Leslie and whisper in his ear. He'd say, you're right now, boy, carry on, you'll be all right. And it was every time and it wasn't every day with a minefield, but it happened several occasions. And when they'd got into the advance into Germany, there weren't so many minefields. There were occasional bits of danger, but it seemed like Tommy had faded away. And when Les came down the gangplank, came home in 1946, he got down the bottom there and he felt his hands either behind him, hands on his arms, bump like that, as you do. Oh, who's that? And it was as hard as anybody behind you. And he said, and this voice said, got you through. And Leslie turned round and there was nobody there. But that was the voice of Tommy.
What an amazing story.
That's a cool one, that one. And that's where I don't know how to explain these things, which is fine, you know, and it's yeah.
And these are guys that wouldn't say that they believed in ghosts, and some of them had a lot of faith, some of them had lost a lot of faith. But they believed in their mates, they believed in their comrades. I
think faith is interesting because, I mean, I did a show a few weeks ago with John McManus about an officer on Omaha Beach called John Spaulding, who led a squad up. And Spaulding, as it happened, was pretty religious. And he, long story short, for those who are watching, we didn't do this story in the show because we were doing an on-the-ground battlefield study, but he was in hospital after he called his men up the bluffs on Omaha Beach, took out a German position from behind, and he was visited in hospital by a friend of his who was the company historian, Joe Dawson. And Joe Dawson says to Spaulding, great story, I'm going to write it up for the regimental newsletter, but tell me one thing. He said, how did you get through the minefield? And Spaulding apparently said, what minefield? The slope he'd went up, they'd crawled up was mined, and men were killed on the same path they had been up. He took about 15, 20 men up this path and no one died. But later on the same path, men were killed, quite a few of them, because the mines then activated. Now, the scientific explanation, I'm using scientific, is they were crawling. Spaulding is, so maybe they were displacing their weight and they didn't activate the anti-personnel mines in the way that a full figure would. But we've all seen the war movies. We all know one heel back hits one of those S mines, then bang, you're blown to kingdom come. But anyway, Spaulding claimed he was guided by hands on his shoulders, guiding him left and right up the path. Now, he put it down to God. Another person might have put it down to like your friend, Leslie, and a fellow soldier. There's a religious explanation is one, but there's also it could be a friend of his, because this was the 1st Division. They'd fought in North Africa. Maybe it was someone who died in North Africa who was coming back to help them out. I don't know. I'm just saying that the religious explanation is one. A physical memory of a location. This, what do you call it? Stone tape. That's in, and then spirits is another one. But that's that when as soon as you told that minefield story, I thought about that one there. And as a historian, when you're explaining a battlefield, you get the landing craft number correct, you know which weapon was allocated to whom, you know what time of day it is, you can kind of catalog all that. Then when you get an explanation about being guided by invisible hands on your shoulders, they're the ones you don't quite know how to categorize that, because there's no morning report to confirm that. You can't look at, so you put it in the story because it is what the guy himself claimed happened to him, but you leave it kind of open-ended as well. I just, there he is, there's a story. And I find that interesting. So, well, Sally, let's do one of your stories. And I've invited anyone else, anyone watching, if you do want to call in with a story, even if it's something just vaguely weird that happened to you sometime on a battlefield, just call in. We're welcome to anyone to come and talk. But Sally,
Penny.
I call you Sally. No, you're Penny, aren't you? I mean, Sally's gone. You're Penny. Yeah, Penny.
I've been called many things in my life.
I'm sorry. I'm in the zone now. I'm being guided by anyway. Penny, tell us one of your stories. Sorry.
Okay, well, the next ones I'm going to tell are to do with Normandy, so please excuse my pronunciation of some of the places. Now, we went to Normandy, was it 2018 or 2017, I can't remember where it was. I'd always wanted to visit the beaches, and we felt my children at sort of 8 and 5 were old enough to at least learn some of it about what happened and what went on, and the distance, say, on some of the beaches that the men were having to run up the sand and all this. We decided to make the journey, and there were certain places. Being a historian, I'm not a D-Day specialist or a Normandy specialist like you are, Paul. I'm more of a generalist, but I did my research to work out where I wanted to go, the museums I wanted to visit, everything else. And I found us a really lovely little old farmer's cottage near Falaise.
Falaise, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep. It was about 4 or 5 miles away from Falaise, so it would have been where all the bocage and everything else would have happened. Anyway, so first few days we were at our cottage, beautiful old cottage, but it felt weird. We didn't feel welcome downstairs. Upstairs was very rickety because I think this was literally a little barn that had been converted into a cottage. Upstairs, you could hear stuff going on. I had my arm grabbed on one occasion, but it didn't feel so bad. But downstairs felt definitely very, very, we weren't wanted there. So I was, one of the things I tend to do when I go into a place and I can feel a spirit or whatever the feeling is of the place, they don't want me there. I say, is it okay if we stay? I'm going to respect your property. Just as I would if I went into one of your houses. I'd be polite. I wouldn't stomp in, throw my jacket on one thing, throw my shoes up and go, right then, make me a cup of coffee. You're going to be polite. And I think it was the second night we were there, and I'd woken up for some reason because I thought I could hear my children walking around outside my bedroom, and I looked up and they're not there, but I could definitely hear footsteps, quite distinct footsteps. Didn't think anything of it, went to roll over to go to sleep, and suddenly my husband goes, who's watching me? Because we were in there was 2 single beds, and I rolled over and there is a shadow figure, no word of a lie, leaning over him, watching him. He's fast asleep, and he said, who's watching me? And I had to sit there and watch this figure leaning over him. That was pretty spooky. But it didn't feel ominous. I know you were saying about people who believe spirits are malevolent. I'm actually more scared of the living than I am of the dead.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
I work on the principle that every single person you meet, how many of them truly, truly are nasty and want to hurt you? Not many. So why would we assume all the people are dead do? That's the kind of way I look at it. Anyway, it's a few days later, and we're sitting downstairs in this cottage, open plan. It's in the middle of a field. There's no roads nearby. You don't get earthquakes in northern France, really, do you?
Not really.
No.
Only when I've had a curry.
Yeah, we didn't have any of them. Anyway, my husband and I were sitting there watching television, and the atmosphere downstairs seemed to change. That's the only way I can. It seemed to go like someone had pushed dry ice through the room. It's very strange. He picked up on it as well. Now, I'm actually what's classed as the sensitive. I pick up on things. He doesn't. But he kept saying, it feels weird. And we were sober. We hadn't actually had too much French wine at this point because we were going to be doing a long drive the next day. So we were trying to hold back that night. And I said, it feels electric in here. It feels like if I touched something, my hair would suddenly go up. And at that, we saw, no word of a lie, my son's bag fly off the table. It didn't just fall. it flew like someone had just gone like that to the bag. And we both sort of sat there going, okay, right, that's interesting. And I went to check, nothing could vibrate. There was no roads, there was no lorries, no reason for this to have happened. And the noises downstairs when we'd be upstairs got worse. But then after about the first week, I think whoever wasn't happy with us being there decided we were okay people, and they calmed down. I mean, things like the washing machine would just turn itself on. Things would be moved when we got back, and we know no one had been in because we double locked the door, those kind of. So that was a bit strange. And when I sort of looked into the history of the area, and quite a lot of stuff had happened there, so it could have even just been someone who was scared of an English accent or a British accent. They might have been scared of the soldiers. I don't know. Anyway, we decided to go to Point du Hoc, somewhere I'd wanted to go, because it almost looks like a moon site, doesn't it, with all the craters, destruction and everything. And it was like, do we want to pay for a tour? And I was like, no, I've read up on it. I'd rather just absorb it myself. When you've got young kids and everything, you are a bit sort of strapped for cash. And you don't want to pay out for things, you try and sort of eke your money out. Anyway, I was looking in, and I think it was been one of the big gun emplacements. Now, I couldn't speak German at this point. This is something I do need to say. And my eldest son, who's 8, he was with me. And all of a sudden, I heard someone yell something out right behind me. And I went, what? And there was only him there. And he went, I didn't say anything. I said, you sure you didn't shout out Scheiß or Scheiße? And he went, I said nothing. I definitely had heard someone shout out Scheiße like that. I didn't know what it meant. I thought it was him messing around behind me. All the other public were way over the other side of the site. They were all up looking out towards the cliffs and the sea. And I heard this because, when you hear something, you turn around and go, what? Because it's like if someone taps you on the shoulder or you hear something, you automatically turn around. And this was really loud and really sort of abrupt. It was only when I got back to the apartment of the little cottage and we had Wi-Fi, I was Googling Scheiße. And do you know what it means in German?
Yes, I shan't say the word. There's a lady present.
No, she's all right. She looked it up as well. And for anyone listening, can I say the word, Paul?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
It means shit. And when you look up the history of what happened there, the almost sudden bombardment they would have suddenly been under, I can imagine quite a few people yelling that as they were trying to deal with it.
Yeah.
I didn't know any of this at the time. I really didn't. And I heard it. And even my son said, what's the matter, Mummy? What did you just hear? Because he saw me spin around and go, what? So, yeah, that's my sort of, there was other things I experienced in Normandy, but that was one that really, really sticks. I did not speak any German at that point. I didn't know what that word meant. And I kind of had to write it down phonetically on Google, and I found the word. It was actually as well when I spoke to some German parents at my son's school, I said, the word Scheiße, and she went, you shouldn't say that, it's a swear word. Oh, is it? So yeah, that
unless it was the word, unless you heard the word for shoot, because the word for shoot is very similar, isn't it? It's Scheißen is similar. It could be that, although I think for an artillery piece it would be Feuer, right? It would be fire, but it could have been you may have it may have been rude, or it was someone saying shoot. That's just an option I'm throwing out there as a possibility.
No, well, that still is cool.
It is cool. Yeah, it doesn't make it any less cool. In fact, it makes it more intriguing. And yeah. Alina's just got a message me. Alina's going to call in. Who you speak? She's got a story about wolf slaying.
It's her birthday today.
It's her birthday, so Alina's going to call in from Poland about a wolf slayer in a minute. But talking about, I'll let Neil talk in a minute. Talking about things that the thing that flew across the room, was that you said. So I just remember this story. It came to my head. This is about 10 years ago, and I was in Nehu in Normandy. And Nehu is where General Patton had his first headquarters for Third Army. And I was there with a sort of disparate group of historians and people. And there was Donnie Edwards, who's a former football player and an NFL player in the States. He was there with a couple of veterans. Helen, General Patton's granddaughter, was there. And there was the guy who owned a museum about General Patton. He was like a French guy who wore a big Stetson hat. He was a bit odd. And we were all there. We were in this little private museum. And one of the veterans, who was a 101st Airborne guy, again, called Lou Vecchi, who since passed away. And Lou was pretty old, like 92 or something. and Helen was and Helen Patton and Lou Vecchi were talking. Now Lou said to Helen, "Of course, you never knew your grandfather, did you?" And she didn't. Helen was born 20, 30 years after General Patton was killed. She said, "No, I never knew him." And she said, "Did you ever meet my grandfather?" I said, No, I was at a parade once. I saw him go past, but I never met him. I guess I'll be meeting him soon, he said, because he was referring to dying and going up to heaven and meeting General Patton. They kind of laughed. And then Lou said to Helen, you never met your grandfather, but does he have any influence on your life other than your work she does kind of for the Patton Foundation? She laughed and she said, "Well, the old buzzard is there watching me all the time, right?" And as she said that, a painting of General Patton, I swear this happened, a painting of General Patton on the wall of the museum didn't just fall off the wall, it threw itself off the floor, off the wall, and landed on the ground and shattered. And I would have been alarmed if it had just fallen. But the fact it actually went off the wall, the physics couldn't have made it go forward. And this was in a sealed cabinet, there's glass behind it. The funny thing was, the owner of the museum was really pissed off and told us all to get out before you break anything else. And Lou Vecchi, the veteran, was like, "Oh, holy shit." And Helen went, "It happens all the time." And Helen, who's a really good mate of mine now, she says those things happen to her all the time. She's always having these messages from General Patton. She was singing a song in a car one day that she didn't know the song. A tune came to her head, and she was humming this tune. And it was like an earworm, got to somewhere and said, "I've got this song in my head." And she's a singer, Helen. Anyway, someone recorded it, and it turned out to be an obscure song from the Mexico campaign that Patton had fought in when he was like a teenager. And there's no way that Helen could have known this obscure kind of Spanish Mexican folk song. And so and they used that whatever the thing is, the one that identifies tunes for divine. So that's just a couple of Helen Patton stories. So, and I say that as I don't believe in spirits, and yet I believe those stories because Helen is a friend. I believe. I mean, the painting, the portrait. I saw that happen. I witnessed that. That's to date my spookiest experience. But so yeah, I mean, I don't know what that is. I don't know what things flying off walls. Explain it. I don't know, but whatever.
There's nothing wrong with being a skeptic, Paul. There's nothing
wrong.
No,
I live my life that way. I mean, I don't always announce, but I'm an atheist. I don't believe in things unless I have good evidence for them. But I don't dismiss things. I'm not going to say there isn't a God, or there isn't a flying spaghetti monster, or there isn't a ghost, or there isn't Loch Ness monster, because you can't prove there isn't. I just say I don't believe there is. But the minute evidence comes my way for any of these things, I will stop and listen. I will analyze what the evidence is, and is it real? Am I hallucinating? And but you can't say no to anything. It would be foolish to say no. But anyway, so who wants to go with another story? Neil, do you want to do a story?
Well, I want to just talk a little bit about some ghosts on the home front.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
As well, which is an intriguing thing, that how quickly ghosts can start to manifest. And these are kind of two stories that they've got a common bond in that they are associated with the London Blitz. One is the London Blitz in 1940. And you'll have probably seen, anybody that's interested in World War II documentaries, films or books, there are some iconic images that stand out from the Blitz. And some of them, they've recently done some very, very good colorized versions showing red London buses, one blown up the side of a building and another one which has actually gone down a hole in the ground at Balham. And it's in the Balham area where it was a terrible loss of life all through London. But this bus that went down, there's people dying all around. It was a terrible loss of life. And within days, now remember, they've got over 50 nights, I think it was, or getting towards 50 nights of continuous bombing during the Blitz. Terrible, terrible, raid after raid after raid. And within days, there's people, the siren's going off, it's dark, They're rushing towards the street shelters. Some people would spend the night in underground shelters. But in the Balham area, where there'd been so much destruction, there'd been shelters destroyed. You know, you couldn't use part of the underground, so there's a bit more of a distance to travel. And on the streets of Balham, people were worried by this bus that kept flying up the road at breakneck speed when an air raid siren went off during the night. That this bus didn't have any sort of, I think they used to put a blue light inside them and shutter windows and do all sorts. This bus was blazing out its lights. There seemed to be people in it. It seemed all steamed up inside, but its lights, there were no shutters, and it was white light flying up the road very, very fast. And that was until somebody was trying to cross the road to the shelter. They thought that the bus was going to hit them. They would surely die. And the bus just disappeared. Curious, huh? Now, on the other side of that, maybe that's a Blitz story. Who knows? But an event that certainly happened as well was in 1943. Now, this is out of the classic time of the London Blitz, but you're starting to get rockets, you're getting doodlebugs fired at the capital. So it's another Blitz. And people are having to take shelter again. People are starting to leave the capital there. They're going to other places in the country. It's a time of a lot of fear. People, do you stay? Do you go? Do you try and stick it out? Or is London going to be flattened, you know, as they'd feared it would have been in the early days of the war? Those raids didn't come. What's going to happen with the V weapons? And this is when a terrible thing happened at Bethnal Green. Now, people were going down the steps, and it's not a huge lot of steps down into the Bethnal Green shelter. It was hardly in the entrance that you're going down these steps. It's a short row. I think it's about 30 odd steps. Somebody at the front, the crowd rushing down there when the sirens went off, stumbled. This is what the belief is. Somebody stumbled, but what we do know happened, that people didn't stop. Panic erupted, and it ended into a crush. And over 170 people were killed. There were about 60 of them, over 60, who were children. Now, it's only in recent years that a memorial has been put up to the Bethnal Green tube disaster. The tragedy of this thing in particular, this event, was that when they sounded the sirens that caused the people to head down that shelter, it was just a test. But in the 1960s and 70s, and I've taught school groups all over the country, and one of the teachers that I knew, she was a teacher, Bethnal Green, 60s, 70s, and when she used to take a group of these, would be just sort of middle school, junior school age kids, aged about 8 to 10. They hadn't done an awful lot about World War II. That wasn't really taught to kids at that age. It would be at high school in the 60s, the 70s, and not many schools taught a lot about it. So these kids they might have heard stuff from grannies and granddads. Anyway, they sometimes, if they were going out, you know, you do out and about days, and they'd use the tube. And they went down the steps at Bethnal Green, and the child started wheezing, as if the child had got an asthmatic complaint. Now, the teacher had never seen the child wheezing and very short of breath, very distressed. And she wondered, what's wrong? Is the child perhaps messing about or whatever? Or I think her concern was mostly that there was something wrong with the child, that maybe it's there's a lot more awareness of anaphylactic shock around nowadays, you know, but nothing like that. The child sat down, calmed down, and away they went. Now, she thought, well, maybe this was an individual incident. But over those years, mid-60s to the late 70s, when she was teaching in that area, didn't happen with every group that she took down there. But on occasion, there would be a child that never had had any sort of episode, just a normal child, not a highly strung child. It didn't matter. There would, on occasions, be, and it would normally be the first time they'd go down as a school group, and there'd be a child that would experience, and maybe a child that didn't regularly use the tube, and they would experience this wheeziness, this lack of breath, and this panic on the spot where all those people died in the Bethnal Green tube disaster of 1943.
Wow, amazing. Well, Alina's, I think, here now. I think, there we are. Hello, happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, dear Alina.
Happy birthday to you. Where's my cake?
I ate it, sorry.
I didn't know it was your birthday, Alina. We haven't said hello before, but hello and happy birthday from me.
So
Thank you
she's
so much.
an exiled Londoner in Poland, so or Polish from anyway. Alina, you're from Poland. You're in Poland right now, so great. Happy birthday! You've got us a spooky story, so go for it. And we should just say, Alina is one half of the amazing History Hack double act who have gone from strength to strength with millions and millions of listeners of multiple periods of history. You haven't had Neil on yet, by the way, Alina.
Neil, get in contact.
Neil, he can do Zeppelins, he can do Secret Churchill's Army, you can do the World War II, World War One. Please, Alex, do anything you want. Get Neil on. He's a good storyteller.
You can do the Victorian villain as well.
Victorian, Jack the Ripper, all that stuff.
It would be
Neil,
a pleasure.
Give me a shout. History Hack, you know where we are.
Right, I'll get you in touch. Right, Alina, tell us your story.
So a lot of people, I mean, Penny gets this because the kind of openness when you go to places of mass murder, which is obvious for my job because I spend pretty much all the time in a site of mass murder. So you're kind of very open to places that you go. So my dad, being the most awesome dad in the world, decides to take me on a motorcycle trip to the Wolf's Lair. In itself, awesome trip. He decides to make it even more awesome. He books us 2 nights in the barracks where the soldiers used to live. So there's still an existing barrack there that still stands. And from the moment we got there, I got the creeps. It was the weirdest place in the world. I had shivers up my spine, all sorts of things. And the first night, we both go to sleep. We're sharing a room. And by the way, guys, he's actually standing behind this camera laughing at me, just so you all know. And he falls asleep and he wakes up in the middle of the night and he's screaming. When I mean screaming, I have never heard my dad in my life scream like this. And he's up and he's like, there was a soldier at the end of your bed. There was a German soldier right there. He's standing right over you. And I'm waking up going, oh my God, I'm actually terrified. And just the shivers that were going down my spine. I'm going to tell you now, I didn't sleep for 2 nights. I sat awake staring at the end of my bed for 2 nights because I was terrified there was a German soldier at the end of my bed. And I really wouldn't be surprised if there were some sort of entities in that area where he saw, and it just, never again am I spending a night in the Wolf's Lair, ever, because of that story.
I'll come with you. I'll look after you.
And Alina, like we said earlier, how do you balance analyzing history? Because you look at records and manifest orders and transport orders and all. How do you balance that kind of study of archival materials with the things that you can't understand? I mean, you must have read stories from the Holocaust, just general stories of that you don't know how to label them. How do you balance that in your work as a historian?
It's really difficult. I'll tell you right now, I've spent a couple of hours in the dark in Auschwitz, in the main camp, and I've never been so terrified in my actual life. I felt that I was being watched and all sorts of things like that. It is the most terrifying thing, and constantly you're reading these memoirs of even prisoners, because once Auschwitz had completely, been liberated and it was used as another POW camp and various different things, former prisoners came into the camp to take care of it, to take care of the site, to keep it for future generations. And you read some of these memoirs of these men who are saying, so for example, we're sitting in Crematoria 1 and we can hear footsteps, but nobody else is there, it's just us. And the weirdest things are coming out of this place, the most terrifying things. I mean, the place is tainted. It is really tainted and terrifying. And my dad is nodding his head behind the camera, just so you all know.
I mean, that stuff all makes sense. I mean, I've told it before, but my mum was a nanny in the 60s for the cherry pickers, the British regiment near Bergen-Belsen. And my mum hadn't been away from. She might be watching tonight, my mum. If you're watching, mum, hello, mum. And she'll tell me I got the story wrong probably, but I don't think I got it wrong. And my mum was a nanny, and she was homesick, and first time away from home, and she would notice from her bedroom window, and it was all part of the old military barrack blocks and what have you there. She would notice the flocks of birds would not fly over an area she could see from her window. And at that time, when she was kind of 21, 22 or something, she wasn't kind of really aware that she was that close to where the Bergen-Belsen camp was. She kind of was there to be a nanny for a serving British Army officer. And she asked the officer, why do they do this, take this funny sort of 90-degree turning? And he said, well, they never fly over the camp. The birds never fly over the camp. And she just repeatedly watched these flocks of birds kind of do a complete 90 degrees, and they would go around the camp or the site of the camp. And how do you explain that one? What do they know? I mean, we do now know how to explain how birds navigate and migrate. We kind of can. I can't, but scientists can explain that. But how they know not to fly over that bit, what is left there, that goes back to that idea of there being something left there, some essence in the area that makes those animals, primitive beings, if you like, avoid it. I don't know how to explain it, but that's what my mum witnessed. And she'll probably tell me I got the story wrong, but that's how I remember it when she told me it, however many years ago it was. So, yeah, I mean, no surprise that those places of such horror have left some kind of indelible. You'd be surprised if they didn't leave something there. I mean, I was in Orador. I haven't been to any of the camps or death camps yet. I was going to be there this month with Alina. That was one of my plans, to be in Poland. But I have been to Orador-sur-Glane in France, where the SS massacred a whole village, and that place is definitely. I don't want to use the word weird in a kind of a horrible way, but it is. You can definitely feel something, and it's not
eerie,
you know
Paul.
it.
That's
Sorry?
the word. It's eerie.
Eerie, yeah. You know something happened there,
and it is very surreal.
Yeah,
and it feels wrong in human nature to be somewhere.
It's haunted, but not as in ghosts and stuff. But it feels haunted, as in there is something lingering that's haunted. Yes. I don't mean as in a ghost appearing, but it feels haunted. Now you're mentioning these camps. There's a couple of stories I just want to say, Nazi related stories that I've been given. Now one of them was given to me by I think he's a friend of yours, Paul. I am afraid I don't know his name. I just knew what his Twitter handle was. But these two are very, very similar stories. Now, a friend of Paul gave me a story. He had something, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, because like I say, I don't speak German, but a Juletta, which was this candle holder that was given to SS members. They were handmade.
Right.
And he had one of those that he said kind of found him. And he also was a collector of SS sort of paraphernalia. And he'd acquired some artifacts from a SS soldier who was killed on the Eastern Front. He never knew his name. All he knew was his number. I think it was his helmet, his dog tags, and a couple of other things. And he decided to light a candle in this Juletta at Christmas, which, as a paranormal person and a person who knows a bit about paganism and everything else, I would probably say that was the worst time of year to do it, because that's kind of that's what they were designed for. And he said that night he saw a German soldier, complete with helmet and everything, sitting on the end of his bed when he'd lit this candle. And he said it freaked him out to the point where the everything got shoved into the garage that night. He ended up selling off the paraphernalia, but kept this candle holder. And he said it's locked up in the bottom of his wardrobe. Now, there is a thing called candle magic in the paranormal world, which Wicca and everything is quite well known. And you can summon things by using candles. So that could have been he summoned this soldier. This soldier wanted to come back for Christmas and nobody knew he'd die, who he was. I don't know. But another similar story I was given was by a friend of mine who's a very, very experienced medium. She's actually done work for the police. She knows her stuff. She is classed as a witch as well. And she'd kind of acquired one of the SS Heron rings that were given to senior SS officers. They were all handmade. They had the SS officer's name, the date they were given, and it had a Himmler's signature inside it. And there's only about 3,000 or 4,000, I believe, of these made. And she was in love with this ring. She thought it was amazing. It was precious and it was an art, and she used to wear it. And she realized after she'd got it that her health had started going downhill. She was a registered epileptic, but her epilepsy went off the charts. It would have been in her mid-30s, suddenly developed endometriosis, which she'd never had her entire life. Her flatmate, his personality changed and he started being abusive and stealing off her. All that. Her brother broke up with his fiance just out of the blue. Everything that could go wrong started going wrong. And she decided she didn't put it towards this ring because she was infatuated with this ring. And she decided to move. She had to leave this guy that she was sharing a house with. And I remember all this happening to her. I didn't realize the links at the time. And she kind of mislaid the ring. And she was really depressed, disappointed she'd mislaid this ring because it's, this is quite a unique item to have. And she didn't think about any bad energy, as we would say, attached to it. Anyway, things started going well. Her brother made up with his fiance. Her epilepsy sort of not relapse, the opposite, whatever the word is. Her endometriosis stopped playing up. Things started going really well for her. And then she rediscovered the ring. She found it in a bag. Really happy she'd found her ring again. And everything started going wrong. In fact, where she placed this ring on her windowsill in her flat, the window just cracked. It just cracked. And anything that got near this ring, something really bad happened. She had such a bad epilepsy attack. She actually had to have facial surgery because she smashed her face when she was in the chemist getting her epilepsy medication. Things just went really from bad to worse for her. And she started to realize that perhaps it was this ring. And then, bear in mind, she's a psychic and a medium. She started having these dreams. And she was picturing a SS soldier murdering small children. And he had the ring on. And they always would wear it on their, in effect, what I'd call your wedding finger, your ring finger.
Yeah. And
she started having these dreams of this soldier. And she said he was evil. She even was scared by these dreams. And she knew she couldn't sell the ring because she'd be selling that bad energy onto somebody else. So she ended up speaking to some very, very sort of well-known paranormal people who could help her what they call bind it. So you kind of bind the bad energy, and they promised to take care of it and not to sell it on. And things have changed for her ever since. She still has epilepsy because you don't heal from epilepsy, but it's one of those things that items can have. You're saying malevolent spirits, they can have negativity attached to them. And sometimes I think it's the intent of the original holder. And I don't know if she's looked into who the owner of this ring was and what his role, whether he was one of the ones who'd murdered innocent children and everything else. But she said the image was so strong. And she said being a medium, she knows when she's seeing something, should we say real? But it took her a good few years to realize this ring was not, it was controlling her, making her want her to keep it and using, I would think, her energy to make bad stuff happen. Quite not nice stories, but as you're saying about...
That's officially the most disturbing story of the show so far. That wins not necessarily the best or the worst, but most disturbing. That's the one I've got the most heebie-jeebies. But Neil, you like me, you were a collector. Well, still are a collector of World War II stuff. I don't have a collection anymore. But I remember people who buy stuff who didn't like a particular thing and would get rid of it. I remember that happening quite often. You just buy a jacket or a helmet or a badge or something, and you just like, well, no, don't like that, and you'd sell it on to someone else. So I definitely think that things from the war can have some kind of negativity attached to them. I mean, that's anything like that you want to add on that, Neil?
Well, it's something that I'm sure Penny will be aware of. It's called psychometry. Some people have a gift to read something. It could be a ring, a lighter, a necklace, a personal object that can help tell, release an energy, a story, a link with the person that wore it. And that's a very dramatic and a dark story that Penny was telling there. And it's not surprising that with that sort of energy around it can attach to an object. I mean, I guess our time is running a little bit short now, but I guess I'd like to tell you a little bit of a darker story.
Yeah, it's getting to the time of night. Yeah, a dark story.
It's not as dark as the SS, but it's pretty dark. And this takes us to the last year of the war. We're in Merry England. We're in Warwickshire. We're in Shakespeare country, not far from Stratford upon Avon. And I want to take you to this charming little village, which is filled with thatched cottages and filled with secrets and fears as well. It's known as Lower Quinton. And very near to Lower Quinton is a place called Meon Hill that historically has been associated with manifestations of black dogs. It's the 14th of February 1945, and a known character, a man by the name of Charles Walton. He was a ploughboy, and as a lad, he's mentioned in a folklore book about seeing this phantom black dog, this doomster dog that's known to run across the hills, and manifestation that they associate very much with an appearance of the devil. Now, he's discovered on Meon Hill. He's been pinned to the ground with a pitchfork, and his throat has been slashed across so close it's almost removed his head. Charlie Walton's dead, but Charlie Walton's believed to be a witch by local people, and he was pinned. You know that you'll see in vampire films that they use a stake through the heart.
Mm.
Well, that's a very ancient belief that the heart is a repository of the soul. And so when you've got suicides or mysterious deaths in the past, people would be buried at a crossroads with a stake through the heart. And it wasn't anything to do with vampires over here. It was very much to do with pinning the spirit. And if you were going to pin a witch, you'd pin it with a pitchfork. And his clothing was disturbed, and the hacks to his body, it was horrible what had happened to Charlie. Now, was that a warning to others? Had he put a curse on somebody? Were they hoping to lift it? Or was it just some sort of horrible killing because somebody owed money to Charlie? Well, Charlie, he wasn't the richest man going. Was he a bit of a money lender? Had he lent money to a local farmer? Who knows? But in those days, if you had a murder on your doorstep, and I think even today, you'll have a local murder squad, but if it's a serious case like this, you'll get in Scotland Yard. And the greatest Scotland Yard detective of his day was Robert Fabian, known as Fabian of the Yard. In the 1950s, they did a television series based about him. And Fabian of the Yard went to Lower Quinton to try and solve this murder of who has killed Charlie Walton. Now, remember, these are the closing months of the war. It should be, a happier time. There's so much more hope for many people. But there was a dark shadow over Lower Quinton, and nobody was saying anything. Was it fear? Did they want rid of Charlie Walton? Was he a witch, or were they just people in fear? Everybody in that village, it sounds a bit like something like the invasion of the body snatchers. Everybody clammed up. No one would say a thing. And the murderer of Charlie Walton was never caught. Even years after that crime was committed, Fabian would go back to Lower Quinton on the 14th of February on Valentine's Day to see if anybody returned to that scene. But nobody ever did. And for years afterwards, the pitchfork hung on the wall of the CID office in Warwickshire Constabulary. But the murderer, Charlie Walton, was never brought to justice. ...
Wow, that's another spooky one. So yeah, well
Well, shall I tell my Highland House one?
you do your one, and then yeah, brilliant. Yeah, people are enjoying this, by the way. People are enjoying isn't maybe the right word, but they're finding it interesting. But yeah, go for your next one, Penny. That's great.
Okay. So this is the one that I told Alina and Alex when I was lucky enough.
That's why she bugged out. So because she knew it was coming. Yeah, she bugged out.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alina, by the way. We'll bring you on again in another show. But yeah, that's why she cleared off.
Alina's fabulous. I'm so pleased I got to introduce to those two and managed to do their show.
They're amazing.
So this happened to me. There's a place called Highland House in Chelmsford.
I know it very well. Yeah,
you do know it. Okay, most people would know it as the site of the V Festival.
V Festival, yeah,
kind of stuff. And one of the stories that used to go round about it was that it was not only did it have a POW camp in its grounds during World War II. I mean, it had an amazing World War I history as well, but we're not looking at World War I for this. But it had a POW camp in its grounds. It was also the HQ for what we now know as the SAS in World War II. And one of the stories was that the amazing and slightly mad Paddy Main had actually driven a Jeep up its stairs. Now, I always thought that meant its external staircase. No, it was actually its internal staircase. And I spoke to the local historian, and she showed me the accounts of the time of him. He was a bit drunk, being a bit of a mad Irishman. And he decided, his men bet him that he couldn't drive a Jeep into the house and up this staircase. And he did it and jammed it up the staircase. And the following day, they had to dismantle the Jeep to get it off the stairs. But that's another story. It's the stories about Highlands are great. I was there. They don't do many investigations there. And I was lucky enough to get on one. And we're in the room they now call the library, it's basically a room with a huge dining table in it. You can sit about 40 people around it. And everyone was there. It was about 30 of us there. And we had a device going called a portal, which is, it's kind of, words come out of it. They sound a bit spooky when they come out, but you can tell that someone's saying something. And we turned it on. And bear in mind, there's about 30 odd people there. And my name, Penny, isn't that common. We kept hearing it saying, Penny, corporal, corporal, Penny, Penny, corporal, corporal. Now, I've never been in the military. I've definitely never been a corporal. And it was a male voice saying it. And I just sort of said, oh, do you want me to come back later with just a couple of people? Yes. Nothing else happened. So I actually went back with one other person, a good friend of mine called Sophie, who's actually also a historian. She actually has got a history degree, and she works as a history teacher in a secondary school. But and she's a World War II. She loves World War II and all things concerning World War II. Anyway, so we went back to this room with another device, one called an ovilus. And an ovilus is sort of a random word generator, a bit like all the gadgets we use in paranormal investigating. You can't guarantee all of them, but sometimes the stuff that comes up on them is pretty damned coincidental to not be real. And so I went back in and I said, hi, Corporal, I'm Penny, I'm back again. What do you want to tell me? And almost straight away, 3 words came up on the ovilus. Corporal Terry Knott, spelled Knott. Pretty specific. And so you kind of run with it and you think, oh, maybe I'm speaking to Corporal Terry Knott. And I say, Corporal Knott, pleased to meet you. Did you die in World War II? Yes, North Europe. And that was all we got. Well, I didn't think, I wrote it all down, as you do. and I didn't think about it. And then a couple of days later, I thought, well, let's have a look on the military record, see if there ever was a Corporal Terry Knott, spelled Knott, who maybe had been based at Chelmsford. Now, I'm sure you know, having done military research, it's almost impossible to find out if someone was SAS at any time, really. They only ever show their original sort of regiment.
The parent regiment. Yeah.
Well, I found a Corporal John Terence Knott, spelt Knott, who was a Royal Marine Commando who died on the 7th of April 1945. His service number is PLY/X2791, and he died in northern Germany and is buried in one of the Northern Europe war graves. What was interesting was I couldn't find much else about him other than that he'd joined the Royal Marines when he was quite young. He was about 30, I think, if I remember rightly. He joined the Royal Marine Commandos at a young age, but his service history, to say it was vague was an understatement. And the battle he died in, I haven't got the battle written down, but when I looked into it, it was an SAS battle.
Wow. Yeah. See, the cynic in me just tells me, then I go, I can't explain that unless you'd known the name in advance. And yeah.
The device has well over 1,000 words it can knock out. And so, you know, you might get the odd name come up like Fred or Jane or Jack, but to have those three words in that order, Corporal Terry Knott, to come up with, and the Knott is spelled Knott, which we agreed we've seen Knott spelled Knot and Not. I've never seen it with the second T on the end.
Yeah, that's very odd. I mean, given it's Halloween, we'll end the show in a few minutes. Given it's Halloween, I mean, we've all been part of sitting around campfires in the Scouts or whatever and telling stories in that spooky environment where you're putting things in each other's minds, and and of course then later that evening people see things they've been talking about. You know, if you've heard the story of the headless carriageman on the carriage, then of course someone will see it later on. I kind of put that down to that, you know, just you've put that thought in your head. But the story I was going to do, well, Ben Main, another historian, was suggested doing this one, and I don't know the full details. So, well, I know a little bit about it. It's Fritton Lake in Suffolk. And Fritton Lake is where Alan King, who I've had on a show, and I've got another show coming up in November. He was an East Riding Yeomanry tank, Sherman tanks in World War II, and Alan King trained at Fritton Lake. And the story there, the haunted story there, is a tank, a World War II tank that crosses the road, and it crosses a part of the road that is a new road that wasn't there during the war. It's taking a journey around what would have been this track of this military establishment, but now a new road runs through it. So the tank is now crossing a modern road that wasn't there in the war. And the local police station, got loads of variation of these people coming in, telling this story of the phantom tank. So when I first heard about it, I thought, yeah, well, they've all heard about the phantom tank. So now they're going out and they see the phantom tank. So I kind of dismiss it, except what makes it interesting is at Fritton Lake, they're actually training for the Sherman DD, the duplex drive, the tanks that had the big canvas wading screens around the side, which outside of World War II historian kind of world, and people, that's not the tanks people really know about. They can visualize, you know, Tiger. But when people go in, these are just modern people, you know, modern 20-something other people go in. When they go in there, so we saw, because they normally they don't think it's a ghost thing. They just think it's something dangerous that shouldn't. They warn the police. There's a thing crossing the road. It's going to hurt people, and the police say, so what was it then? So well, it was like a tank. And they go, yeah, but only at the bottom. They say a tank at the bottom of the top bit, and I don't know what they're describing. It's like it was like in a box, or it was covered with something, and they're describing a Sherman DD tank. And that's when I go, because they're not describing something they should know the appearance of. And that's when I find that a bit weirder. So yeah, that's the story of Fritton. There are various, and what the story is a crew, at least one crew drowned on training in the lake there. And supposedly this is the tank of that crew. And Alan King, I believe, Ben, if he's watching this, would correct it. I believe he knew that crew. And it was just that, you know, if you can imagine a Sherman tank, when a DD tank goes wrong, it goes very badly wrong, because the weight of the water on top of the tank, you can't open the turret hatches. you're dead. And so that's supposedly the haunted tank of Fritton Lake. And yeah, so that's kind of the last story I was going to give, because I wanted to sort of bring this sort of cynical point of view that if you're looking for something, maybe you will see it. But if you're describing something you weren't expecting seeing, that's why I don't have an explanation for it. That's why I go, yeah, don't know. It's so it's been interesting. This anyone else got a final story they want to do?
I'll do you a quick one.
Quick
story.
one.
Now, it's one of those stories that you do hear regurgitated now, but I've heard it from the mouths, and I've even seen, when I was a lad, I collected an Action Man sticker book full of war stories, and it was in there. It's a bit like, Warlord magazine. They'd often retell military tales that have a really strong root in fact, and probably even VC actions they're turned into a cartoon version. I have heard it from a man who was in the desert of North Africa. He swore it was him, and he swore that he was part of a Royal Engineers. It was not a reconnaissance unit, it was a recovery unit that would go out across the desert, and they would if they wondered if a tank had new parts, enemy tanks had new parts to it, or we can't easily get replacement parts for British tanks, so they'd take off the bits that we'd need. So it's wreck and recovery. On one of his expeditions, he decides to go and get just these few bits, and I think in truth he was after a few souvenirs, doing a quick souvenir run, trying to get jerry helmet, a few daggers and stuff. And he gets out there and he's fishing around in this lone German tank, and he gets in his vehicle and it won't start. He can't get back. He's in the middle of the desert, and he knows kind of roughly where he is, and he thinks, right, I've got no compass on me, I'm going to try and walk back. It's getting towards dusk time, so we might be all right. Anyway, as he starts walking over the ridge, there's another guy coming towards him, and he thinks, oh, who's this? And as they get closer to each other, it's another guy. Both of them are unarmed, but the other one is not wearing a uniform like his. He's Africa Corps. And he's a tall fella, blonde hair, bit sunburned, and he speaks a little bit of English. And he is also lost. His tanks are wrecked over the ridge, and he's trying to find his way back too. But what he has got in his bag are a couple of bottles of beer. And he says, right, come back. Right. So anyway, they find, I think they go back to the tank that he'd got the bits and pieces off, first of all, the British guy. And they sit in the shade of the tank. The German shares his beer with him. And I think our British guy, he's got a few bits of food. And they kind of wait until it gets a bit darker. And then when it is dark, you can see the little lights just giving it away just enough that's where the Germans are. And of course, it's easier to walk in the desert towards a light in the dark than it is in the sweltering heat. And so both of them, having had quite a pleasant time, a bit like the Christmas Day meeting, they bid fair, because you can have a go at killing each other, or are you just going to walk back? These are just ordinary guys. And they bid farewell and walk back. Come the morning, there's wreck recovery, and they're coming in with the vehicles, and they got a German tank. And he said, there, that's the one. That's when I was getting those bits off last night. Yeah, and they look inside, and then there are the two bottles that they're dinged in there, but also laying in there is a body that he hadn't found. He hadn't detected it there. It wasn't rotten, but it had been in there for a while. Not recent kill. And that was the man that he had met. It was his tall German comrade with the distinctive blonde hair, who had been dead for days. Eerie stuff, huh?
Wow. On that note, yeah, no, I mean, yeah, it's this did exactly what I wanted to do with this show. We just, look at these things, you can't just tell them, share them. It's what a night of the year to share them on, and just, don't make any comments, don't make any judgments. I'm not into the paranormal. Penny is. You're coming in between the two, Neil. It's been a fascinating talk. It's what can you say? And I would never know how to, these stories I have, like the general Patton photo and this, I don't know how to use them. That they don't fit into the context of a normal show. So what the hell? Just do an odd one and talk about it. So yeah, I think everybody knows these stories, have heard these stories, and there's always some basis there. And you sort of thought about interesting about the talking about the Warlord comics things. A lot of those Commando and Battle comics had spooky things. There was things of like spooky guns that got passed on, and whoever had the gun would be a hat that would transpose feelings. But most
the pilot that had no shadow. Do you remember that one?
But what we forget is most of the people who wrote those comics and who illustrate those comics were World War II vets. So I'm sure the writers drew on the tales they'd heard, because all the veterans I've ever met, they've all got a tale. They've all got Fred went out one day, didn't come back, but then they've all got at least one story of something they can't pin it down to. And it's just having an environment where they can kind of share those stories, because they don't fit into your normal kind of, if you're meeting up at an annual reunion of military guys to talk about the losses, then telling a ghost story in the middle of it might change the mood. And so they would come off the record, these stories. They wouldn't be told at reunions. They'd be told later on over a pint of beer or something. So I'm glad we've talked about it. So fascinating stuff. So Penny, where can people find out your Haunted History podcast? Where can they find out about more of your work? I mean, I'll put your website in the description below, but if you want to plug anything, then please feel free.
Yeah, well, it's not just a podcast. So as I say, I write quite a lot of blogs. I write for Haunted magazine. I've got 2 books out. The third one will be out some point early next year. They all look at the history combined with the paranormal and everything else, and in quite a non sort of every noise is a ghost kind of way, like some people do. As you can probably tell from the way I've been talking, I do tend to analyze things before I say I can't explain it. The website contains everything, so hauntedhistories.co.uk. There's a Facebook page, Haunted Histories, and you can catch me on Twitter, well, under the Haunted Histories handle.
Super. And Neil, your new book comes out imminently, December, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, the brand new book, Beating the Nazi Invader, that looks at Nazi spies and saboteurs and underhand behavior in Britain in 1940. It's out. It's just literally just hitting the shelves, and hopefully the book reviews will follow in the next few days.
Well, come on and talk about it. Come on to World War II TV when you're ready, and we'll talk about that as well, Neil. Because that's
I would be honoured to do that.
Whisper about that book. Neil, whisper about it, because I don't know if my husband's listening. That might go on his Christmas list.
I'll send you a link. But if people have enjoyed ghosts and my talks on those, my Ghost Hunter's Guide to Norfolk is an evergreen, and the many volumes by myself and others in the Grim Almanac series, they're still available, or you can get them via Amazon. They've been reprinting them for years now, and they're a great introduction to the ghosts, legends, and darker history on your doorstep. I think they managed to do a volume for just about every county of England. So look out for Grim Almanacs. And I hope you'll enjoy those. Above all, thank you for listening. And it's very rare for us ghost hunters and people with ghost stories to tell to be in on Halloween night.
Yes, well, that's why this show ended up happening, because Penny was going to be out, then she's in and locked down.
I was supposed to be at Anzio Camp in Leek in Staffordshire.
I would normally be on a haunted railway or a historic house somewhere.
Yeah.
And before we went live, folks, I mean, we talked about this idea of straddling the worlds of kind of serious World War II history with also some other branches of study. There's no reason why they can't overlap. There's no reason that, and the stories I think we've shared have overlapped. They've overlapped real history with things you can't explain, and what people attribute them to is down to them and their own imaginations and their brains. But they are as historically interesting as they are ghostly interesting. But what a fitting way to talk about Halloween, or talk about Halloween night. So thank you very much, everybody watching. In terms of WW2TV, I've got a show on Monday evening with Dr. Philip Weir. We're talking about the little ships at Dunkirk, busts and myths out the water. Then next Friday, I've got my Spike Milligan special coming up with Jane Milligan, Spike's daughter, Peter Caddick Adams, about history, and fingers crossed, the amazing comedian Stuart Lee is joining me for that one, which I'm really excited about because that's a big name. No offense to Penny and Neil, but Stuart Lee is kind of in. You can't be my hero, Neil. I've known you too long. You're my mate. But
you're my special friend, Paul. You always will. It's
good. And love to Fiona and love to Penny's husband. Haven't met. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, folks. And don't forget to check out the Patreon page and definitely check Penny's books and check Neil's books and check everything else. And well, that's it. Happy Halloween. And that was an interesting way to spend the evening. So thank you very much for watching, folks. We'll see you all again soon. Thank you very much. Cheers and good evening. Bye.
Don't have nightmares.